be covering the muscular system. It's gonna be a quick overview because really there is no way I can cover 650 muscles in 1 hour video lecture. So I do have other videos that I recorded before where I went over muscle of the arms, of the leg, of the torso. Those are all separate videos. I use mannequins. So if you want to study muscular system in detail, of course, watch those videos. And again, this, as I already said, going to be a quick overview, right? So let's go ahead and begin. Skeletal muscles have origin that is attached to stabilized bone and insertion. Insertion is a movable end of a muscle attached to bone being pulled. Insertion is always pulled towards origin. Now on this diagram, you can see muscle, bicep brachii, and we have origin, that is our scapula, and insertion, that is radius. And you can see the muscle goes across the joint. So when muscle goes across the joint, then it can produce movement within this joint. Now, another thing we want to remember, muscles can only pull. They can never push. So if you flex your elbow, you use your bicep brachii muscle. So you pull your forearm towards your arm. If you want to extend your elbow, you cannot use the same muscle. You need to use muscle in the opposite compartment, and that's going to be your tricep brachii. Groups of skeletal muscles by functions. We have prime movers, agonist, provide the major force for producing specific movement. Antagonist, oppose or reverse a particular movement. And synergist, add force to a movement, reduce undesirable or unnecessary movement. So if we have, for example, bicep brachii, that's going to be our prime mover. Antagonist would be muscles that oppose the movement, tricep brachii. Now, bicep brachii flexes your elbow. Tricep brachii is antagonist because it's extend your elbow, and synergist to bicep brachii gonna be, for example, brachialis muscle because it helps the prime mover. How do we name skeletal muscles? Names can be pretty complicated, but they do make sense. We name muscles by location. For example, bone or body region associated with the muscle, like bicep brachii, right? Or rectus femoris in the femoral region, or flexor carpi radialis, muscle that is on the radial side of your forearm. We name it by shape. Example, deltoid muscle. Deltoid is triangle. Trapezius, shape of trapezoid. By relative size, maximus, largest, minimus, smallest, longus, long, flexor digitorum longus, gluteus maximus. Those are some examples. Directions of fibers or fascicles. Rectus, fibers run straight, rectus abdominis, rectus femoris. Transversus and oblique, fibers runs at angles to an imaginary defined axis. For example, transversus abdominis or external oblique muscle. Number of origins. Example, biceps brachii, triceps brachii, 2 origins for biceps, 3 origins for triceps, biceps femoris. Location of attachment, named according to point or origin of insertion, flexor carpi radialis. Carpi means it's attached to carpal bones. And action, flexor or extensors, muscles that flex or extend representatively. And we combine all these different characteristics in one name. So, for example, extensor pollicis longus. It's a muscle that extend your pollex or thumb, and it's a one that have longer tendon, right? Abductor magnus, muscles that abduct your thigh, and it's a large one, and so on. So names can be pretty long, but the longer the name is, the more information you get from the name about location and function of the muscle. For example, we have muscle called sternocleidomastoid. It tells you the origin, sternum, and clavicle, and insertion, mastoid process of temporal bone. So if you look into the names of muscles, you can get lots of information about location, action, shape, and size of the muscle. Muscle mechanics and arrangement of fascicles. I just want to remind you what fascicles are. Now, muscle cells are organized into bundles. So you have bundle of muscle cells that called fascicle. And we have different type of organization for those fascicles. We can have circular fascicles arranged in concentric rings. Example, orbicularis oris, muscle around your mouth, or orbicularis oculi. Convergent fascicles converge towards a single tendon insertion. So you can see here's a muscle fascicle, and they all converge towards this tendon. So example would be your pectoralis major. Muscle fibers pulls in a different directions, permitting different actions based on stimulation. So it depends where what fascicles are activated. These muscles can elevate your arm or adduct, bring it towards the midline, or even so it's extend your, let's say, extend your elbow no, I'm sorry, not extend. So it can abduct. It can let me think for a moment. Yeah, elevate and depress your arm. And it's all because of different fibers are activated. Muscle fascicles can be parallel. Fascicles parallel to long axis of a strap-like muscle. For example, sartorius muscle that crosses your thigh. That's the most common arrangement of fascicles. Fusiform, spindle-shaped muscles with parallel fibers. So here you can see bicep brachii is the example. In this muscle, we usually have muscles that have a big belly. pinnate, short fascicles attach obliquely to a central tendon running the length of the muscle, for example, rectus femoris. And we have unipinnate, when we have short fascicle attaches to the tendon on one side only, extensor digitorum longus. Bipinnate, attachment on both sides to a single tendon, example, rectus femoris. And multipinnate, when we have several tendons and we have muscle fascicle attached on both sides to those tendons. Example would be deltoid muscle. So here on this diagram, you can see all this different arrangement of fascicle that we just described. Movement of the body. Okay, so let's look at the movement giving on here. So the first pair of movement is flexion and extension. And of course, there is a flexion of arm and there is extension of arms, there is flexion of knee and extension of knee. Flexion is when we reduce the angle between two bones. So in this example, you can see a flexion of the shoulder. And if you move your arm to the back, that's going to be extension at shoulder joint. Now in knee, so here's your thigh and this is your leg. And when you decrease the angle, you call it flexion of the knee. If you move opposite way, that's going to be extension. So here it's, by the way, shown on this extension of shoulder and extension of knee. You can do flexion and extension with many other parts of your body. This you can see flexion of neck, extension of neck. Now, when you go beyond the anatomical position, sometimes it's called hyperextension, but in this example is called extension as well. So you can call this movement to the back hyperextension or just extension. Because even if you, okay, so if you go and bend your head right now and you touch your breast with your chin, that's going to be your flexion. And then when you return back to anatomical positions, it's extension of neck. But if you go beyond the anatomical position, it's also extension or hyperextension. You can have extension of your spine, of your torso over here. So flexion and extension and hyperextension again. So when you bend forward, that's your flexion of the vertebral column or spine. Go back to anatomical position, extension, go beyond anatomical position. So you're bending backwards, that's your extension or hyperextension. Now abduction and adduction, and this is shown on the shoulder joint. Abduction, when you take your arm away from midline of your body. Abduction, if you heard about a child being abducted, that means it was taken away. So you take it away from midline, abduction. You bring it towards midline, adduction. Now, if you combine flexion, extension, adduction, and abduction, that's movement is circumduction. Rotation, right? You have a rotation of neck, you have rotation of your at your hip joint, and it can be lateral rotation or medial rotation. Away from midline, lateral rotation, towards midline, medial rotation. And then we have a specific movements of the body that is only applied to certain parts, like pronation and supination. We use it pretty much for hands only, and supination when you turn your palm upwards, like think that you having bowl of soup and you're holding it, and pronation, the palm down, right? So if you're looking at your hand right now, and if you can see your palm, then your palm is in supine position, so it's a supination. If you're looking at your hand and you see dorsal part, then it's in a prone position, right? Or you also use supine and prone position. You can use it for entire body. So if somebody is on their back, so you see their belly, they are laying down, for example, and you see their belly, you say it's in the supine position, body in supine position. If somebody is laying on their belly and you can see their back, the body is in the prone position. Now with your foot, you have dorsiflexion, because this is the dorsal part of the foot, so you have dorsiflexion. If you start walking on your heels right now, then that's what dorsiflexion is. If you start walking on your toes, that's plantar flexion. Inversion, you move your foot towards the midline, and eversion away from a midline. This is protraction of the mandible. Mandible moves forward, and retraction, mandible moves back. Elevation and depression of the mandible. So you elevate your mandible up and you depress the mandible, right? Like you can elevate your shoulder and you have depress your shoulder as well. You can elevate your scapula, you can depress your scapula, you can retract your scapula, so you move scapula bones towards each other, or protract scapula, you move scapula bones away from each other. And apposition is when you're touching your fingers with pollex. That's a movement called apposition. And we can only do it with our fingers. We cannot do it with our toes. And humans are the only animals that freely can do apposition. Other animals, even like some apes, they are not able to do apposition of their fingers. And it's allowed for more precise movement, fine movement, so you can pick up small objects. Skeletal muscle of the body are grouped by function and location. Information of each muscle should include name and description. Note information in the name. So name can give you information about function or location, as we already discussed. Origin and insertion, there is usually a joint between the origin and the insertion. Action, insertion moves towards origin, best learned by acting out muscle movement on one's own body. So if you learn how muscles of your own body moves, then you understand better action in general. And innervation, name of major nerve that supplies the muscle. So like how much can we learn about each muscle, right? We can learn its name and location. Oops, sorry. We can learn name and location. We can learn origin and insertion, action and innervation. In this PowerPoint, in this lecture, because it's overview, we're not gonna cover all this characteristic of the muscle. we're pretty much gonna look at location only, and few muscles we will mention innervation. So this is anterior part or anterior view of human body. And you can already see how many muscles we have. We have 650 muscles. Muscles arranged into layers. We have superficial layers. If you remove superficial layers, you will see intermediate layers, and then we have deep layers. So sometimes to see those deep layers, you cannot see those, not sometimes, I guess all the time, you cannot see deep muscles unless you remove superficial. And on diagrams, usually they use one side of mannequin, like in this example, right side for superficial muscles and left for deep muscles. So that's our anterior view, and that's posterior view. On the posterior view, we do not have deep muscles shown. We pretty much only looking at superficial muscles. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with muscle of the head. They are divided into two groups: muscles of facial expression that allow you to smile, close and open your eyes, frown, and so on, right? So that's a facial expression, non-verbal communication, and muscle of mastication, chewing, and tongue movement. So two groups: facial expression, mastication, and tongue movement. So facial expression, they insert into skin. Now, if in your skull, the bones that make your skull, they do not move. There is only one movable bone, that's your lower jaw, mandible. But your muscles are for movements. So there is no point for your muscles to insert into bone if they cannot move that bone, but muscles can move your skin. So that's why muscle of facial expression insert into skin, important in non-verbal communication and innervated by facial nerve. It's a cranial nerve. That means it's branches from the brain, and it has a number, nerve number 7. So facial cranial nerve number 7 innervates muscle of your facial expression. And those muscles include epicranius or occipita frontalis. So here's the muscle covering a superior part of your skull, and it has frontal belly, shown here in blue, and occipital belly. And connecting this belly is cranial aponeurosis, that is connective tissue. You can call this by frontalis, so you can call it frontalis muscle and occipitalis muscle, or you can call it epicranius, but you cannot really call it like frontal belly and occipital belly, because if you're talking about bellies, you're talking about this muscle, epicranius. Have alternate action, pull scalp forward and backwards. Well, you don't really pull scalp, right? You pull skin of the scalp. So if you look at the frontalis, the insertion, actually the skin of your forehead, and when you contract it, you raise your eyebrows. So when you raise your eyebrows, that's your frontalis muscle. Frontalis muscle does it for you. Okay, so here are some other muscles that we just look at the location. So again, that's our frontalis or frontal belly of the epicranius muscle. Then we have orbicularis oculi. Orbicularis, sorry for this, for some reason I get to next one. So we have orbicularis oculi. Orbicularis means that's a circular muscle around your eye, oculi. So here's the eye over here, and it's responsible for closing your eye. However, you have, this is another muscle of your eyelid, but orbicularis oculi involved in closing your eyes. This is the second one. Orbicularis oris. So that's orbicularis oris, a circular muscle around your mouth. You open and close your mouth using it. So orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris, risorius, there's muscle right here. And you could kind of like what this muscle does. Just imagine that this muscle gets shorter, so it pulls the corners of your mouth laterally. Mentalis, right there. What mentalis does, it raises your chin. Buccinator, that's the muscle of your cheek, right? And oh, I missed our zygomaticus muscle. So here's our zygomaticus muscles, minor and major. And what they do, those are your smiling muscles. Right, so again, zygomaticus, orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris, risorius, buccinator, mentalis, frontalis. Some of the muscles, not all of them. Muscle of mastication, 4 pairs involved in mastication, all innervated by trigeminal nerve. It's also cranial nerve, but it's nerve number 5. So here only prime movers of jaw closure are temporalis and masseter. So only 2 shown here instead of 4, temporalis and masseter. And because they are muscle of mastication, right, what they gonna move? Your mandible. If they move your mandible, they insert it into mandible because you move insertion towards origin. Muscle of tongue movement. 3 muscles anchor and move the tongue. All of them has part glossus in their name. Glossus is tongue. Gena glossus, protraction, go out. So gena glossus, so it's muscle right here. Higher glossus, this is muscle right here from hyoid bone to the tongue. So gena means your chin. So it's from your chin to your tongue, gena glossus. Higher glossus, hyoid bone to the tongue, and styloglossus. Remember, in a temporal bone, you have styloid process. So it's from styloid process to your tongue, styloglossus. All innervated by hypoglossal nerve. And again, you see this glossal, that's tongue. So it's under your tongue, kind of nerves that go under your tongue. Cranial nerve number 12. Muscle of the neck. Your neck can be divided into anterior triangle, right here, and posterior triangle. And muscles that divides your neck into 2 triangle is sternocleidomastoid, shown here in the green color. It's a muscle that separate posterior triangle from the anterior triangle of the neck, major neck flexor. Sternocleida means it's originate on the sternum, on the clavicle, mastoid inserted into mastoid process of temporal bone. And then very superficial muscle here covering your anterior surface of your neck is platysma. Anterior triangle, during our lab, we will look at those muscles in more detail, but right now we're just gonna divide them into 2 groups. Suprahyoid muscle above the hyoid bone, and infrahyoid muscle group below hyoid bone, most involved in swallowing and head flexion. Posterior triangle, scalene muscles, side flexors, so flex your neck laterally flex your neck, scalene, and we have anterior, middle, and posterior scalene muscles. So, so you have anterior here, middle, and we cannot see posterior scalene on this diagram, but anterior and middle scalene in right there. Then we have levator scapular rotation, shown here as this yellow color, and splenius capitis, shown in blue color, that extension and rotation of your neck. Now, this muscle on the back is trapezius. Muscle of the thoracic wall. We have pectoralis major muscle over here. Pectoralis minor, when you need to remove major, and then you can see this pectoralis minor. So it's deep to pectoralis major. Serratus anterior, it's on the side, so it will be right here. So here's the muscle shown. So that's a midline. So that's serratus anterior. And intercostal space, you have external and internal intercostal muscles. So here's external and here's internal, shown in yellow. Muscle of abdominal wall, anterior part, rectus abdominis muscle. This shown here in green. There is abdominal aponeurosis covering rectus abdominis. So underneath this abdominal aponeurosis, the muscles that give you six packs, that's our rectus abdominis. Then on the side, you see in the rectus abdominis flexes the trunk, external oblique, most superficial muscle, rotates the trunk, deep to external oblique, there is internal oblique, also rotates the trunk, and then we have transversus abdominis, the deepest muscle. You also have some features that you need to know. Right in the middle, there is a linea alba. To the lateral side, here and here, we have linea semilunaris, and between those transverse lines called tendinous intersections. And because your rectus abdominis is divided by this tendinous intersection, that's why when you exercise this muscle and it get bigger, you see this what we call six packs. Back muscles, splenius capitis and splenius cervicus. That's a capitis, that's a cervicus. Head extension, rotation, and lateral bending. Deep muscle, back muscles. We have really like lots of muscles here, but we combine them into group. Group is called erector spinae muscles, back extension and lateral bending. And you can see three kind of like most superficial, and we have muscles that even deep to those. Spinalis, longissimus, and iliocostalis. So those three muscles are part of erector spinae group. Then we have superficial muscles of the back. Latissimus dorsi, this muscle right here. So that's a muscle. Movement of arm and lateral flexion of spine. Trapezius, this muscle on the top. Rhomboidus major, so you need to remove trapezius to find your rhomboidus major and rhomboidus minor. And here's the levator scapular muscle that is part of neck muscle as well. Main function of these muscles, trapezius, rhomboidus major, rhomboidus minor, and levator scapula, is main function is to stabilize and move scapula. Now, all these muscles, they are inserted into scapula. If they move scapula, they insert it into scapula. So here we can see a big picture, anterior view, pectoralis major, then deltoid muscle. Now trapezius, you see part of the trapezius on anterior view because trapezius is inserted into clavicle. So here's the trapezius on the back side. Then we have latissimus dorsi, muscle on the low part of your torso posteriorly, and you can see a little bit of latissimus dorsi on anterior view. Now we're moving to shoulder muscles that include deltoid. That is not shown over here, but I showed it to you in the previous picture. Teres major, those are for arm movement. And teres major, okay, so this is posterior view. So you're looking at somebody from a back, right? So that's a back view, posterior view. And this is scapula, and scapula attached to your arm, humerus, right? So that's a scapula. So in the scapula, you have this muscle here. It's not colored, but that's a muscle right there. That's a teres major muscle. So it's originate on the scapula, insert into humerus. And because it's inserted into humerus, it moves humerus. And then we have a group of muscle called rotator cuff that include, so let's again go back to this picture. Now, scapula, it has bony structure here called spine of the scapula. So you can palpate. When you palpate your scapula right now, you're touching this spine of the scapula. Now, above this spine, you have supraspinatus. Supra means above the spine. Below the spine, shown here in blue, infraspinatus, and inferior to infraspinatus, you have teres minor. Now, if you look at the anterior view to the front, anterior part of the scapula, shown here in green, is subscapularis. Now, these four muscles, and mnemonic is SITS. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, they make a group of rotator cuff. And his lateral view, you can see how they all inserted into humerus and making this cuff that moves your humerus and protects your shoulder joint. Upper arm muscles, anterior compartment. We have flexors in the anterior compartment. Biceps brachii, coracobrachialis, this green one, and brachialis. And in the posterior compartment, extensors of arm are tricep brachii. So here's our bicep brachii. Bicep means two heads. So we have a short and a long head. Right, so short head is this one shown here green. And this is a long head shown here in the green. They all originate on scapula here. So bicep brachii. And on the next one, we have our triceps brachii. Now it's a posterior view. It has three heads. It has a long head lateral head, and then medial head, you just can see just a part of it. So it's on the medial side. So that's our tricep brachii. Long head, lateral head, and medium head. Now we're moving to forearm, anterior compartment. We have superficial muscles, pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, intermediate muscle, flexor digitorum superficialis. Oh, I'm sorry, superficial. Pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, and flexor carpi ulnaris. So we have 4 superficial, intermediate, flexor digitorum superficialis, and deep, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor pallicis longus, pronator quadratus. Now, many of these muscles tells you where they're located and what they do. Flexor, they flex. Carpi, they flex your carpal, they attach to carpal bones. That means they flex your wrist. And it's located where your radius is, and radius is lateral. So anterior or front of your forearm, on the lateral side, you have flexor carpi radialis, muscles that flex your wrist. Flexor carpi ulnaris flexes your wrist, but it's on the medial side where your ulna is. Flexor digitorum superficialis flex your fingers. Flexor digitorum profundus flex your fingers as well. Flexor pallicis flexes your thumb, your pollex, your big finger, your thumb. And pronator quadratus pronates your hand. Right, so we're gonna look at the pictures, and again during our lab, of course, we will discuss those muscles in more detail. So what we're looking at over here, that's you looking at your forearm and its anterior part. So you're in anatomical position, so that's on the front. So this one is actually, let me figure out over here. So this is your left arm. Yeah, oh, it says over here. Why do I need to figure it out? It's your left forearm. So go ahead and look at your left forearm right now. And this area over here, this is medial. So that's close to midline of your body. So here's pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, and flexor carpi ulnaris. So they all in order. Now, deep to these muscles, you have flexor digitorum superficialis. Yes, flexor digitorum superficialis is not shown here. It's only profundus, but a flexor digitorum superficialis is muscle right there. So flexor digitorum superficialis is first, then underneath it, flexor digitorum profundus, then flexor pallicis longus, and pronator quadratus is this green muscle over here. That's your pollex or thumb. Forearm posterior compartment, you have 6 superficial muscles: brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis, extensor carpi radialis. Okay, so let's go back to number 2. Extensor carpi radialis longus. Number 3, extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor digiti minimi, and extensor digitorum. Right, so brachioradialis is this muscle here. So if you look at the lateral side of your forearm, that's a pretty big muscle. You just see part of it. Then extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. What do you think this muscle does? It's extend your wrist. And it's located where your thumb is on the radial side. And one has a longer tendon and one has a shorter tendon. So this is extensor carpi radialis longus with the long tendon and extensor carpi radialis brevis with shorter tendon. Then we have this yellow muscle. What do you think it is? It goes to the finger and it's in the posterior compartment. So it's extensor digitorum. This is extensor digitorum, extensor fingers. Then we have this green muscle. Look over here. Extensor digiti minimi. Extend your little finger. And then we have this one over here called extensor carpi ulnaris. It's on the ulna side because ulna is where your little finger is, and radius where your thumb is. So extensor carpi ulnaris, so it's extend carpal bone, so your wrist, and it's on the ulna side. There is one more muscle here. This one right there, because it's not going to be shown in the next picture. This is aconius muscle. Okay, now we move deep. So it's in conius. I included into deep muscles because I just want to divide it 6 by 6, but we saw aconius previously. Then we have supinator, abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, extensor pollicis longus, and extensor indicis. Supinator, supinate, right? So move your palm so you, upwards. Abductor pollicis longus, it's abduct. So it's take your big finger, your thumb away from the hand, and it has a long tendon, right? So here's our supinator that we have abductor pollicis longus, this one. Then we have extensors. Extensor pollicis brevis and extensor pollicis longus. What they do, they extend your thumb. And extensor indicis is this one, it extend your index finger. So if you notice here, let's just go back. In your upper extremity, you have arm and forearm. And you have anterior compartment and posterior compartment. In anterior compartment, you have your flexors. You flex your elbow, you flex your wrist, flex your fingers. In the posterior compartment, so here you flex your wrist, you flex your finger. In the posterior compartment, you have extensors, starting with tricep brachii. It's extensor. You extend your elbow, you extend your wrist, you extend your fingers. Now, you cannot have flexors and extensors in the same compartment. So, for example, if you have flexors in anterior compartment, front of your forearm, then if you have flexors, right, in the anterior compartment, then extensors will be in posterior compartment, because they are antagonistic muscles. Okay, and muscle of the palm, intrinsic muscles of the palm, we're gonna just divide them into groups. We will have a thinner group where your thumb is, hyperthinner group where your little finger is. So thinner, ball of thumb, hyperthinner, ball of little finger, and then between intermediate group that flexes fingers. And I will show you some important nerves here, but at the end of this PowerPoint, we will talk about innervation of muscles a little bit more. So what we're looking here is the anterior view of scapula, of your arm, anterior view, and a little bit of forearm. You have group of muscles here called, they all originate from brachial plexus. And the major nerves, so those nerves gonna innervate muscles of your shoulder, arm, and forearm. And the major nerves over here will be your radial nerve, axillary nerve, muscular cutaneous nerve, median, and ulnar. So median will be in the middle, ulna gonna be on the ulnar side, radial is actually on the posterior compartment and then on the radial side. Muscular cutaneous will innervate anterior compartment of the arm, and axillary go to your armpit. As I said, we will talk a little bit more about nerves, but right now I'm gonna stop this video. I don't want to make it too long. I think it's long enough already, and I will record the second one when we cover muscles of the low extremities and major nerves that innervate muscles of your arms and legs. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I hope it was helpful.